Chapter 11. Let's just say I had an epiphany. It wasn't until CJ and I were on the flight to London that I told him about my near-death experience. That was you? CJ's eyes widened. I heard the screech from down the road. The near finality of it all had settled over me like an unexpected calm. Ladies and gentlemen, as we start our descent, please make sure your tray tables are stowed and your seat backs are in their upright position. You seem amazingly together, CJ said. Let's just say I had an epiphany. Really? CJ didn't look convinced. You never know when your time's up. I realised I need to stop overthinking things. That sounds like something an overthinker would say. CJ smirked. Did you come up with that before or after nearly becoming roadkill? During, I said with a grin. Turns out stepping backward gives you a lot of time to think. Where to? Said the cabbie at Heathrow. The Novotel London West, I told him sheepishly. The Novotel? Repeated an incredulous CJ. You kept that under your hat. I booked it before we left home. Why? I thought it would be familiar because we would have already stayed there, I said. How could I know what would happen? You could have cancelled and booked somewhere else. I didn't think about it until a couple of days ago. By then it was too late. You realise you can never complain about my accommodation choices again, CJ said, shaking his head, half serious. But our fears were baseless. We checked in without issue. No spandex-clad children, no obstructive employees, no single room. This time, the Novotel actually felt like an upgrade. Then again, after the shoebox at the Hotel Titus, it might as well have been the Taj Mahal. Maybe history doesn't repeat itself after all. It was late, and I was exhausted. As I collapsed onto the bed, I let myself appreciate the small miracle of a better room, and the fact that I'd quite literally survived another day. To my surprise and relief, there was no PTSD-like reliving of the moment, no flashbacks, no lingering panic, just gratitude. Europe had been everything I'd hoped for, and more. The fun, the frustrations, the moments of genuine awe, all of it had left its mark. But that chapter was over. Now I was back in London with even more to experience. Tomorrow promised new adventures, more chaos, and hopefully fewer brushes with death. The next morning, we enthusiastically went down for Novotel breakfast. I've got to say, CJ said through a mouthful of pancake, for all the trash talking of British cuisine, a full English breakfast beats a continental one hands down. Totally agreed, I said. Give me bacon and eggs over stale croissants any day. So, Mr. Tour Guide, remind me, what's on the agenda today? First up, British Museum, I said. Self-guided. Controversial choice, CJ said. The imperialism, the theft, or the self-guided bit. A little from column A, a little from column B, CJ said, and a lot from column C. From there, I continued, we have to get to the Tower of London by 2:30. We better get cracking, right after my second cup of coffee. It was a quick tube ride from Hammersmith to Russell Square, followed by a short walk to the British Museum. Its grand Ionic columns and imposing facade loomed ahead, just as I remembered. It looked every bit the vault of the world's greatest treasures, even if some acquisitions were, let's say, questionable at best. CJ flipped through the visitor map. The Parthenon marbles. Aren't they always in the news? Definitely, I said. But these days, half the collection is controversial. Egypt wants its artefacts. Nigeria wants the Benin bronzes. It's all a bit of a mess. So basically half this museum is stolen. Define stolen. Walking through the entrance, I felt the same awe that had hit me 40 years ago. As an 18-year-old history nerd, I'd been floored by the sheer scale of it. Egyptian, Greek, and Roman antiquities all in one place. Back then, it had seemed obvious. Why not safeguard humanity's cultural inheritance in one central museum? Naive, CJ said, as I explained my younger self's perspective. Naive and paternalistic, I agreed. But that's what I thought back then. Now I can see the problem. Imperialism? Among other things, I said. But here's the thing. This might be our last chance to see some of this stuff before it gets handed back. That's a diplomatic way of saying, I like it even if it's wrong, CJ said. Fine, you got me, I said. But let's see how you feel when you're standing in front of the Rosetta Stone. CJ drained the last of his coffee. Challenge accepted. For a while, we drifted through the exhibits. This is interesting, but we should probably focus on the highlights, said CJ. Agreed. If we're going to see the big-ticket items and still get to the tower in time, we need to get organised. It was around then that our wanderings led us into an enormous open space with a cylindrical building in the centre and covered with a massive torus-like roof. Well, that definitely wasn't here 40 years ago, I said, open-mouthed. CJ again referred to the map. This is the Great Court, he announced. It's 2 acres in size, making it, and I quote, the largest covered public square in Europe. Impressive. What's the thing in the centre? That thing, CJ said, clearly relishing the fact that he was the one providing information, is, I quote again, the world-famous reading room. It was in the Great Hall that CJ and I sat and made our plan. First stop, Egypt, and of course, the Rosetta Stone. As we approached the famous artefact, CJ studied the stone, tilting his head. What's the big deal? It's just a rock with a lot of scribbles. 3 kinds of scribbles, I said, rolling my eyes. Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics. It's how scholars figured out how to read hieroglyphics. CJ nodded sagely. Sort of like an early Google Translate. Exactly, I said, except working it out took decades, not seconds. So we could now tell what I, snake, ankh, bird meant. Exactly, I said. Look at it. How many languages can you see? You said 3, and it looks like 3, CJ said, so I'm going with 3. That's what I would have said too, I said, but I was reading something the other day that said there were 4. See? I pointed to the side of the Rosetta Stone, and there in faint stenciling, but as conspicuous as a fingerprint at a crime scene, were the English words captured by the British Army in 1801, presented by King George III. Nothing like desecration to make grand larceny seem less serious, CJ muttered. Apparently, when Britain defeated France in Egypt, they nicked the Rosetta Stone, which Napoleon's archaeologists had only just found. So if they hadn't beaten Napoleon, we would have seen it 2 weeks ago in the Louvre, CJ said. Probably. We worked our way through the building and eventually ended up at the most contested of all the contested items in the museum, the Parthenon marbles. A large room in the museum had been set aside for the frieze from the Parthenon. The marble bas-relief sculptures were mounted on the walls at eye level, looking decidedly worse for wear. These don't look so great, even for 2,400 years old, said CJ. It's amazing they're here at all. They've been hacked at, burned, and even blown up. Sorry, he looked confused. Did you just say someone blew up the Parthenon? The Turks were using the Parthenon as a munitions dump. The Venetians shelled it in 1687 and, boom, and the British swooped in and swiped the leftovers. Pretty much, I said, and the Greeks want them back. They might even pull it off this time, I said. I'll believe that when I see it, CJ said. We wandered around the museum for another hour, knowing that it would be impossible to even scratch the surface of its vast holdings in our limited time. We saw the Easter Island Moai statue, the Benin bronzes, the Assyrian lion hunt reliefs, and the Japanese samurai armour. As we left, I glanced back at its imposing facade. The British Museum is an undeniable marvel, a testament to human achievement and arrogance in equal measure. It's a place where history is preserved, but also where wounds remain exposed. It echoes of power, conquest, and the legacy of empire. CJ looked at his watch. So, Tower of London? Yes, I said, and it's a monument to man's inhumanity to man. You're going to love it. We set off on what was essentially a self-guided walking tour, weaving through Trafalgar Square, down Whitehall, and past the heavy security outside number 10 Downing Street. CJ gave the security detail a once-over. Looks like someone's expecting trouble. The British are always having trouble with their prime ministers. CJ snorted. It's not exactly the White House. Nope. It's subtle and understated. But I'd bet they've reinforced everything, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are bunkers and secret escape tunnels. Secret escape tunnels? CJ said. You've watched too many Bond movies. We crossed into Parliament Square Garden, where the iconic landmarks of Westminster came into view. CJ pointed toward the Elizabeth Tower. So that's Big Ben, huh? Not exactly, I said. Big Ben is the name of the bell inside the tower, not the tower itself. CJ shot me a look. Why does everyone call it Big Ben then? Because it's catchier than Elizabeth Tower. It's the alliteration that does it, he said. But now that I know the truth, I feel obligated to correct everyone back home. You'll be as popular at parties as I am. Finally, we reached the statue of Abraham Lincoln, where we met our guide, Marco, a cheerful man in his late 30s wearing a green jacket with a patch that read, Official Tower Guide, who was, it turned out, a Croatian immigrant. After signing in, we joined the rest of our Tower of London tour group, and Marco led us to Westminster Pier to board our cruise down the Thames. The ferry moved past the London Eye, its massive circular frame reflecting in the river, then cruised under the Waterloo and Blackfriars Bridge, the city unfolding around us. As we approached the Millennium Bridge, CJ leaned over the rail. I've seen that before, he said. It's the Harry Potter Bridge, the one the Death Eaters destroyed, I said. Never watched those movies, he said. I must have seen it on a TV show. To our left, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral rose above the skyline. Now that's impressive, CJ said. On the other side of the river, we passed Shakespeare's Globe. Is that the real globe? CJ asked. Afraid not, I said. The original burned down. To be, or not to be, authentic. A building familiar to any fan of the later Bond movies then glowered to our right, the headquarters of MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence agency. I'm glad to see that it's still in one piece, I said. Blofeld blew it up in Skyfall. We passed under a succession of bridges, the city's layers of history reflected in their design. When we reached the new London Bridge, CJ couldn't contain himself. Wait, isn't this the one that's always falling down? Congratulations, I said. You're the billionth person to make that joke. Your prize is my silent judgment. CJ sighed. That's it? No plaque? Not even a slow clap? What a letdown. Ahead of us, Tower Bridge spanned the river. After the beer tour debacle, I'd be happy never to see that bridge again, CJ said. Agreed. Finally, the Tower of London came into view on the left, its ancient walls standing in stark contrast to the modern city around it. The ferry berthed at Tower Pier, and we filed off with the rest of the tour group. That was a pleasant break, CJ said as we stepped onto solid ground. Glad you enjoyed it, I said. It's all beheadings and torture from here on in. The group shuffled along the cobbled path, a mix of tourists, although judging by the voices, mostly from North America. Marco halted us just outside the imposing White Tower. He spun on his heels with theatrical flair. Welcome to the Tower of London, Marco said, gesturing dramatically. Founded in 1066-ish. Built to keep the Normans in charge and everyone else terrified. Worked like a charm, I bet, CJ muttered. Oh yes, the locals believed it was a symbol of oppression, Marco grinned. William the Conqueror really knew how to win friends and influence people. Marco led us into the shadow of the White Tower and onto an impeccably manicured lawn where a number of large black birds congregated. The ravens of the tower. According to folklore, he said, if the ravens ever leave the tower, the kingdom will fall. To prevent this, at least 6 ravens are kept at the tower at all times, under the care of a dedicated raven master. Now, that's an impressive job title, CJ said. Marco continued, the tower's been many things over the years, a royal palace, an armoury, a treasury, and even a menagerie. Yes, folks, a zoo. Lions, leopards, and even a polar bear who was allowed to swim in the Thames on a leash. CJ perked up. Imagine having a polar bear in your moat. I can't even imagine having a moat. What the tower is most famous for, though, is being a prison, Marco said. Between 1100 and 1952, it held some of the most infamous prisoners in history. He paused for effect, then added, Elizabeth I herself was imprisoned here before becoming queen, and Sir Walter Raleigh has spent 13 years locked up in the bloody tower. Though, to be fair, he did have a writing desk and access to his books. He was locked down and working from home before it was even a thing, CJ whispered. Quick question, Marco said to the group. In which century do you think most people were executed in the Tower of London? 15th, someone called out. 16th, came another voice. Not even close, Marco said. The 20th century. What? Came a few scattered voices. During the First and Second World Wars, the tower was used as a prison for spies, and 12 men were executed for espionage. Before then, only 7 people had been executed in the tower grounds. Most executions took place on Tower Hill, just outside the walls. Marco then pointed to a round glass memorial on the green. This marks the site where Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Lady Jane Grey were executed. I tried to imagine the scene. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, escorted to the scaffold. The expert swordsman imported from France for the occasion, the thud of a single stroke. It was another moment where the echoes of history cut through the banality of tourism. Then Marco brightened, breaking the group reverie. But it's not all doom and gloom. The tower also houses the crown jewels, which have been kept here since the 17th century. And speaking of which, I'll meet you guys over at the entrance to the crown jewels in an hour. Until then, please feel free to explore on your own. CJ and I decided to use this time to check out the White Tower. As we climbed the external stairs, we paused at a sign marking the spot where 2 children's remains were discovered, bodies that some believe belonged to the infamous princes in the tower. CJ frowned at the plaque, not ringing any bells. Oh, this is a good one, I said. When Edward IV died, his son Edward V and his little brother were sent here by their uncle Richard, supposedly for their protection before Edward's coronation. Yeah, that never actually means protection, does it? Nope. Turns out, Uncle Dick had other ideas. He declared the boys illegitimate and made himself king as Richard III. Then, centuries later, the skeletons of 2 children turn up in the walls. CJ exhaled. Yeah, okay, that's a lot darker than I expected. We carried on into the royal armouries, a shiny and impressive display of armour and weapons. It was, for the most part, standard museum fare, interesting but nothing thrilling. That was until CJ stopped in front of a glass case and pointed, Wait, is that what I think it is? I grinned. Henry VIII's armour, impressive, huh? Impressive isn't the word I'd use, CJ said. That codpiece has its own gravitational field. It was true. Henry's armour had an unnatural bulge in the groin area. It was like he was concerned he'd become aroused mid-joust, and that set us off. We spent some time brainstorming Henry VIII dick jokes, because, honestly, how could you not? I would challenge thee to a duel, my king, but thy lance is too mighty. Only 6 wives, sire. Thy codpiece couldst handle 12. Is that a blunderbuss in thy pants, my liege, or art thou pleased to see me? I couldn't help wondering how the teachers chaperoning a class of 10-year-olds on a school excursion explained that particular detail. Soon we were back with Marco for our session with the crown jewels. I'm no royalist, and this extravagant display of wealth, even though it technically doesn't belong to the monarch, didn't sit well with me. In particular, the dazzling yet controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond. Once held by Mughal, Persian and Sikh rulers, it was looted by the British East India Company and gifted to Queen Victoria. The Koh-i-Noor's ownership is murky. India, Pakistan, Iran and Afghanistan all claim it, but its legacy of imperialism is no less troubling. The fact that it supposedly carries a curse adds to its allure. It is said that no male should ever wear it. All that for a glorified hat? CJ yawned as we re-entered the light of day. I couldn't help but agree. Once we emerged from the crown jewels, The tour was officially over, and as we were leaving, we walked past the Trader's Gate, the ominous water entrance beneath St. Thomas's Tower. Trader's Gate would be a great name for a heavy metal band. CJ made devil's horns with both hands. True, I laughed, but this was reputedly where prisoners were brought by boat to the tower. Anne Boleyn, Sir Walter Raleigh, and even Guy Fawkes came through here. After leaving the tower, we walked past a curious church which had a stone-arched gateway topped with a bas-relief of 3 skulls. It was the famed St. Olave's. Trader's Gate could use those skulls as a logo, CJ said. This is my kind of church. Look, I said, pointing to a sign on St. Olave's wall. This was Samuel Pepys' kind of church too. Let's pretend I don't know who Samuel Pepys is. Samuel Pepys lived through the Great Fire of London and the Great Plague and wrote a famous diary about it all. Okay, CJ said. I continued to read the sign. Apparently Charles Dickens called this the Churchyard of St. Ghastly Grim. Really? I can't see why. By the time we got back to the hotel bar, it was beginning to hit us. This time tomorrow night, CJ would be on a flight back to Melbourne. For him, this journey was over. It's been a great trip, he said. It has, hasn't it? Okay, he said, downing his scotch. Now I have to tell you an uncomfortable truth. And please remember, I'm telling you this as a friend. I was taken aback. For once, CJ had a serious look on his face. Pappy is not working, he said. You've been snoring. A lot. When? Usually after we've been drinking. You're going to have to be more specific. I'm just saying that the CPAP's not working properly, he said. Have you been able to sleep? You've driven me fucking crazy some nights. I'm so sorry, I said. Not my problem after tonight, he said. But you better look into it. The next day dawned bright and clear with only a few streaky clouds overhead. It was CJ's last day, but my mind was elsewhere. Did Pappy work okay last night? Before bed, I'd given my CPAP machine a thorough once-over, changing filters, checking connections, and hoping the unpredictable UK power supply wouldn't betray me. It must have been doing something right, since I was sleeping better than those horror nights in Seoul. But the fact that I could still snore loud enough to bother CJ? That was concerning. CJ caught my expression. I slept fine, he said. Had to boot your bed at one point, but you stopped. We checked out early. After my nightmare experience with the Novatel's forget-me-not baggage storage, I wasn't thrilled about leaving my bags with them a second time. But we didn't have much choice. It made the plan simpler. We'd do the tour, return in the afternoon, grab our bags, and we'd go our separate ways. CJ to the airport, and me to Maggie and Eric's place. So my last tour is Burnings, Butchery and Black Death, CJ said. Sounds like a hoot. You're not going to get all morbid again, are you? I told you, I'm a changed man. Another full English breakfast and a couple of Americanos later, we walked to Hammersmith Station for a quick trip to the Barbican, where we'd meet Tom, our guide. From there, we'd walk through Smithfield, the site of medieval executions, a mass grave, German bombings, and the notorious slum featured in Dickens' Oliver Twist. Tom was easy to spot. He was the guy standing outside Barbican Station with the clipboard and the crowd around him. Welcome, gentlemen, he said, ticking off his list as we approached. You're our last two. Let's go. It was a short walk to the Charter House, a beautiful old stone and brick building nestled behind a lush green park. This, Tom indicated the park behind him, looks like a peaceful, verdant place, doesn't it? Well, it's actually the site of a 14th century plague pit. It's believed over 10,000 plague victims are buried here. Who doesn't love a good mass grave? CJ said. And the building behind me, Tom said, is the Charter House. This was initially built in the 14th century as a monastery, and stayed that way until Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church. When the prior of the Charter House opposed Henry's claim as head of the church, he was executed, and the other monks fared no better. Most starved to death in prison. Perhaps a slight overreaction, CJ said. Henry then handed the Charter House to John Dudley, Tom said. Over the years it changed hands until eventually Thomas Sutton established a school for poor boys and a home for impoverished old gentlemen. From the grim history of the Charterhouse, Tom led us through winding streets to St John's Gate, pausing before the imposing stone archway. It was the entrance of Clerkenwell Priory, the English headquarters of the Knights of the Order of St John. Otherwise known as the Knights Hospitaller, they were a Catholic military order founded by Crusaders in the 11th century to look after the sick and injured. It would eventually become the modern St John Ambulance. So, Crusaders with first aid kits? CJ muttered. After the dissolution of the monasteries, Tom said, it served many purposes. William Hogarth spent time here as a child at his father's coffee house. Later, it became the printing house for the Gentleman's Magazine, where Dr. Samuel Johnson worked. He's the guy who created the Dictionary of the English Language. From there, we walked into Smithfield Markets, once a livestock market for over 800 years, but now being transformed into the new Museum of London. However, its history goes way beyond that. Smithfield was a prime spot for executions, Tom said cheerfully. William Wallace, the Braveheart guy, was hanged, drawn, and quartered right here, supposedly shouting freedom the whole time. More likely, "Ark!" said CJ. Less heroic, I said, but probably more accurate. Later, Mary I had over 200 Protestants burned at the stake here, Tom added. Not for the first time, I reflected on the sights of misery and death I'd encountered on this tour. The Colosseum, Pompeii, probably Stonehenge, and now the brutal executions at Smithfield. Maybe it was just my imagination, but these felt like places where the veil between past and present was at its thinnest. People really were bastards. I had to shake it off. I'd promised CJ I wouldn't get morbid. Our next stop was the Priory Church of St Bartholomew the Great. Tom ushered us inside the historic Norman building. St Bartholomew the Great is one of the oldest surviving churches in the city, Tom said. It was founded in 1123 and named for St Bartholomew, one of Jesus' apostles. St Bart took the gospel to Armenia, where he was flayed alive for his trouble. I think I've met him in Amsterdam, I said. Did he play the sax? Tom went on, ignoring my idiocy. The church is renowned for its stunning Norman architecture. It's still an active Anglican parish and a popular filming location. It's appeared in 4 Weddings and a Funeral and Shakespeare in Love, among others. As if on cue, a woman from the parish office approached Tom and told him that he wasn't allowed to run his tour there. He dismissed her politely. Tom led us to the Lady Chapel, explaining how it was cut off from the church during the Reformation and repurposed for commercial use. At one point, it even housed a print shop, where Benjamin Franklin worked for a year as a printer. The tour moved on to a memorial marking the 1381 Peasants' Revolt, when Wat Tyler led an uprising against the young King Richard II. It was here that Tyler met with the king to negotiate, but after a scuffle and a brief chase, he was captured and executed, along with several other leaders of the rebellion. We walked past Pye Corner, where the Great Fire of London was finally extinguished. The spot is marked, for no good reason as far as I could tell, with a sculpture of a naked boy, carved in wood but covered with gold. At the entrance to a small street, prosaically named Cock Lane, Tom launched into the tale of Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. In 1762, London was gripped by the story of a ghost, said to be the spirit of Fanny Lyons, who had died under mysterious circumstances, Tom said. The spirit communicated through knocks and scratches, drawing huge crowds, until it was exposed as a hoax. And I thought it was about a pox-ridden prostitute, CJ said. After the tour wrapped up, CJ and I walked with Tom toward the Barbican. So, how long have you been doing this? I asked. Oh, guiding? About 6 years now. Cool tour, CJ said. Thanks, Tom replied. I run a few different ones, but this is my favourite. London's medieval history is everywhere. Tom's tour had been gruesome and fascinating, but also oddly beautiful. CJ interrupted my thoughts. I'm going to miss these cheerful little outings. He wasn't wrong. This was an ending. It had been 40 years since CJ and I last travelled together on our Kentucky tour across the USA. Would we ever do something like this again? We certainly couldn't wait another 40 years. As this part of my journey came to a close, I realised it wasn't just the places or the history I'd remember most. It was sharing them. It was the camaraderie that made even the darkest stories feel lighter. And then I smiled, imagining exactly what CJ would make of that thought. In a shocking turn of events, the Novotel staff retrieved our bags with speed and efficiency. As we wheeled them out of the foyer, we passed the Cosmic Tour desk where a new group of travellers had gathered. A ghostly echo of tours past. An elderly man in a stained polo rearranged bags, looking vaguely bewildered. Nearby, a loud disembodied sniff echoed. And then we overheard a woman who looked like she'd sucked on about 10 lemons, speaking to Doris at the desk. "Look, I'm not one to complain, but," she began. I nudged CJ. "Is it just me, or—" "No, I see it too. I guess every busload of European travellers comes with a recurring set of archetypes." At that moment, 2 middle-aged men stumbled into the group. They looked like they were still recovering from the night before, but they managed to smile as they exchanged bemused glances with their busmates. "That's just eerie," CJ said. Then his Uber arrived. It was time to say goodbye. "No tears, okay?" CJ said as the driver tossed his bags in the trunk. "I know, saying goodbye to me is traumatic." "I'll try to hold it together," I said, rolling my eyes. "Don't crash or anything." "And fix your bloody CPAP machine," he added. "I'm serious. Next time, I'm bringing earplugs." "Next time?" CJ grinned. "What? You think I'm letting you do Europe without me again? You get hit by a bus." "You weren't even there to save me the first time." "True. But you wouldn't have survived the Cosmic Tour without me." "Fair point." "Thanks for inviting me." "You invited yourself." "Doesn't sound like me." We hugged briefly. Then he was gone. CJ didn't need a heartfelt goodbye or a dramatic send-off. That wasn't his style, and maybe that was the point. Some people leave with a bang. CJ had left with a smirk, and somehow that felt just right.